You ever feel like you were the glue holding everything together and no one noticed until the whole thing came crashing down? Yeah, that was me. My name is Camille Torres. I am 38 years old, and until recently, I was the automation lead at a company called Fluxin Technologies based in Seattle. I grew up in a quiet suburb of Sacramento, but Seattle's where I built my career. I am not a fan of the spotlight. I never cared about office politics or who was kissing up to whom in the break room. I just showed up, put in the work, and made sure the systems that ran the company never failed. I was the engine under the hood, running quietly, day after day, and apparently that made me easy to ignore. I spent 6 years at Fluxin, and in that time, I designed and maintained the automation that powered procurement workflows, onboarding systems, and internal support ticketing. I wrote custom scripts that saved entire departments hours each week. I eliminated redundant tasks, cut processing times in half, and integrated back-end systems so seamlessly, most people never realized how many manual disasters I prevented. But despite all that, to the higher-ups, I was just Camille in the corner. That is what Brian Lasker, our director of business ops, once called me, in front of a room full of people, like I was furniture, like I did not matter. I will never forget the time I asked for 2 extra days to document some of the workflows I had built. It was a small ask. The automation I created was all tied to my personal cloud credentials, but no one else seemed to care. Brian brushed me off with a laugh and said, "Just make sure nothing breaks, Camille." That was it. No support, no backup engineer, no redundancy planning. As long as things worked, they assumed it was magic, and I let it slide, over and over again. Maybe because I thought one day someone would recognize the value of what I was doing, but that day never came. The company had this obsession with surface-level performers. The loudest people in the room always got the credit. I was not flashy. I was not interested in brown-nosing or selling myself every 5 minutes. My system spoke for me, or at least I thought they did. The sad truth is, if you are not on the executive radar, your work might as well not exist. They only noticed me when something broke. And even then, they barely asked how I fixed it. They just moved on, assuming it would always work again. Fluxin was running on a digital backbone that no one wanted to understand, because I built it quietly, efficiently, and without asking for much. There was this one time the vendor payment system froze just hours before a major quarterly payout. Finance was in full panic mode. I fixed the issue in 30 minutes and wrote a permanent patch that prevented it from ever happening again. No one said thank you. Brian just looked at me and said, "That's why we keep you around." I should have walked out that day, but I didn't, because part of me thought, maybe if I just kept solving problems, eventually they would see my worth. But you can only be invisible for so long before the silence starts to feel like a slap in the face. What stung the most was knowing how much I had saved that company, financially, operationally, emotionally. Entire departments relied on the systems I had built. HR, IT, procurement, customer support, all humming along because I had figured out how to connect the right tools at the right time, often while working late into the night. And still, I was excluded from strategy meetings. I was not even in the room when they made decisions that would impact the very systems I had created. They never saw me as a leader, just a task rabbit who delivered magic in silence. Looking back now, I realized the resentment had been building for years. I loved the craft, the problem-solving, the feeling of making chaos turn into order. But I hated how easily they dismissed me, how quick they were to forget. Maybe they thought I would just keep showing up, running things quietly forever, like some background script no one has to update. But people are not scripts, and one day I had enough. They fired the wrong woman, and trust me, they were about to find out exactly what that meant. Most people at Fluxin never realized how close they were to disaster on any given week. That was my job, to make sure no one ever felt the chaos I quietly kept at bay. For over 5 years, I operated in the background, catching problems before they became headlines, fixing bugs before users noticed, and patching systems during off hours so business could go on like nothing ever happened. I never made noise about it. I never asked for credit. I believed that good work would speak for itself, but in a company where performance was measured by how often your name was mentioned in meetings, my silence became my invisibility. The truth is, people only remembered I existed when something broke. I cannot count how many times I stepped in just before a launch to save a team from missing a deadline. I had written scripts that automatically flagged broken dependencies, cleaned up vendor data, and resynced authentication errors that would have caused major downtime. But when I asked for time to document these systems, to bring in a second pair of eyes, or even create a simple failover plan, Brian Lasker always brushed me off. "Just keep it running, Camille," he would say with a smirk, like I was a machine, not a human being. He never asked how it all worked. He just assumed it always would. It used to frustrate me how he dismissed my concerns. I would explain calmly and clearly that if something happened to me or my laptop, the company would be stuck. All the core workflows were tied to my personal Google Cloud credentials, because years ago, they decided to skip investing in a centralized access strategy. Every automation I built used my tokens, my secrets, my configurations. There was no backup account, no alternate admin, just me. I did not hoard that power. I asked multiple times to fix it, but fixing it meant spending money and time, and no one wanted to do that as long as things kept working. The thing about being the fixer is, people start to rely on you in a way that feels less like trust and more like convenience. They do not want to understand what you do. They just want you there when something goes wrong, and invisible the rest of the time. It got to the point where people would come to me directly with issues that were not even in my job description, because they knew I would solve it faster than going through the proper channels. It felt good to be needed, but it also made me a crutch. The more I cleaned up, the more messes they made, and the less anyone tried to build systems that could survive without me. I will never forget a meeting where a consultant from Delta Curve came in and asked the leadership team what their redundancy plan was for procurement automation. Brian laughed and said, "We have Camille." I was sitting right there. He did not even glance at me. That was the moment I realized they were never going to take me seriously. To them, I was not a leader or an architect. I was a utility, something they could depend on without investing in. And the worst part? That mindset was contagious. Even people I liked and respected started to treat me like a permanent fixture, someone who would always be there, always solving, always quiet. There is a kind of anger that builds slowly when you are overlooked for years. It is not loud or dramatic. It does not explode in one big scene. It simmers. It seeps into your bones. You start second-guessing yourself, wondering if maybe it is your fault for not pushing harder, not selling yourself more, not playing the political game. I tried, but every time I raised my voice, I was told to calm down. Every time I asked for change, I was told to wait. And after enough maybes and later, Camille, I stopped asking. I started planning. So I stopped documenting. I stopped explaining. I kept things running, just like they wanted. But I also kept a backup of everything I built. I made sure that if they ever decided I was dispensable, they would find out just how indispensable I truly was. Because if you are going to treat someone like a ghost, do not be surprised when they vanish and take the whole system with them. I knew the winds were changing the moment Monica, our CEO, announced a partnership with Delta Curve Solutions. She stood up in the all-hands meeting and smiled like she had just solved world hunger. "We are entering a new phase of growth," she said. "It is time to streamline and optimize." That was the buzzword of the month, optimize. But what they really meant was cut costs and offload responsibility. Delta Curve came in with their sharp suits and flash drives, tossing out words like agility, cross-functional collaboration, and lean architecture. It sounded fancy. It always does. But anyone who had been through this kind of move before knew exactly what was coming. They shadowed us for 2 weeks, scribbling in their little notebooks and nodding at whiteboards like they were decoding the universe. But they never asked me a single meaningful question, not one. They did not care how systems were tied together, or which integrations were duct-taped with custom code, or what would happen if certain automations failed. They were not interested in how things worked, just how they looked on a spreadsheet. I watched them dismiss entire workflows I had spent years refining with the stroke of a red marker. It was theater. They were not here to understand. They were here to eliminate. 2 weeks after Delta Curve's discovery phase, I got the calendar invite. It was from HR. No subject line, just a Zoom link and a 15-minute slot. My stomach dropped. I had seen it happen to others over the years. No warning, no conversation, just a sudden meeting invite like a digital guillotine. I logged in right on time. Brian was already there, grinning like it was a casual Friday, and we were about to talk weekend plans. HR rep sitting beside him, silent as a statue. I remember every word. Brian leaned back, cleared his throat, and said, "Camille, we appreciate everything you have done, but we are going in a new direction. Your position's been made redundant." I did not say a word. I did not blink. I just stared at him and nodded once, slowly. Inside, though, I was on fire. Redundant? The systems I built touched every part of the company, from procurement to onboarding, from ticketing to automation. I was the silent thread weaving it all together. Without me, the fabric would tear. I knew it. They did not. That was the problem. They thought because I was quiet, I was disposable. They thought because things ran smoothly, they would keep running without me. But nothing about what I did was redundant. It was just invisible to people like Brian. He went on about support during the transition, offering the usual fake sympathy lines. "You will receive severance. You are welcome to apply for other roles. We wish you the best." I could barely hear him over the noise in my head. Not panic, not sadness, just this clear, rising voice that said, "They have no idea what they just did." I had given this company 5 years of stability. I had worked through weekends, patched systems at midnight, solved problems they did not even know they had. And in return, I was getting a 15-minute Zoom call and a pre-written script. What stung more than the layoff was the arrogance, the smug way they assumed everything would be fine without me. They never stopped to think about what I had built. Never asked for handover notes, never even asked how to log in to the tools I managed. They assumed that because Delta Curve had a playbook, they could plug in new tools, new people, and everything would just click. But you cannot automate away knowledge. You cannot outsource what you never took the time to understand. They were betting the entire backbone of the company on a deck of slides, and they were about to lose. As the call ended, Brian smiled one last time and said, "Thanks again for all your contributions, Camille. You really kept us moving." I just nodded and clicked leave meeting. Not a word, not a goodbye. I had nothing left to say, because I knew something they did not. The tools I built were never handed off. The credentials were still mine. The integrations, the secrets, the workflows, they all lived in places only I had access to. They wanted efficiency. They wanted lean. Well, they were about to get very lean, whether they liked it or not. My final day at Fluxen Technologies came without ceremony. No goodbye cake, no awkward team huddle, not even a parting email from leadership. Just me, alone at my desk, with a half-empty coffee cup and a resignation envelope I never had to write. They thought I would slink out like I was lucky to have lasted that long. What they did not realize was, I was not leaving in defeat. I was leaving in control. And that made all the difference. I started my day like any other, logged into the same terminal I had used for 5 years, but this time with a different purpose. While the rest of the office hummed with ignorance, I began my silent housekeeping. First, I migrated all of my personal backups, scripts, service blueprints, notes, everything I had ever built or fixed that was tied to my name. I had always stored it securely off-site, encrypted and archived, but I made sure the latest versions were saved, time-stamped, and organized. Not for revenge, just for clarity. I wanted proof of what I had created, of what they let go. Then came the access tokens. Everything in Fluxen's infrastructure was connected through services I had authenticated with my Google Cloud account. That included automation pipelines, logging tools, even error alerts. For years, they had run on my tokens I had asked repeatedly to transfer into a shared centralized system, but they never prioritized it. They assumed I would always be there. So I calmly went into the developer console, revoked each key, logged out of the dashboards, and disconnected third-party integrations that used my credentials. I did not delete anything. I did not sabotage. I just pulled my access, like they should have done themselves long ago. Next, I opened Jenkins, our beloved deployment system. Well, my deployment system, no one else ever touched it. Tucked into the configuration was a webhook I had set up years ago, one that silently triggered our API deployments every time a build passed. It was simple, elegant, and fragile in the hands of someone who did not know it existed. I disabled it with one click. The system did not throw an error. No alarms went off. It just stopped working quietly like me. I left everything else untouched. No files deleted, no system sabotaged. That was never my style. I was not interested in destruction. I was interested in consequence. If they had taken 1 week to understand what I managed, this transition would have been smooth. But they did not. They left everything tied to me, invisible and unacknowledged, and assumed it would run on autopilot. I gave them exactly what they planned for. A quiet exit, but silence can be sharp when it follows years of noise. By the end of the day, I had boxed up the few things that mattered. A framed photo of my dog, a notebook full of diagrams, and a USB drive they never even thought to ask about. As I walked past Brian's office, he gave me a lazy wave without lifting his eyes from his screen. "Thanks again, Camille. All the best." That was it. No handshake, no follow-up questions, just that smug, careless confidence. I smiled back, even though my stomach twisted with something between sadness and satisfaction. I nodded and said, "Take care, Brian." Walking out of that building for the last time felt surreal, like stepping out of a burning house that no one else knew was on fire. The air outside was cool, the sky overcast, typical Seattle, but I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because I was free, but because I knew exactly what was coming. I did not have to lift a finger. I did not have to say a word. The failure was already baked in. All I had to do was step back and let it unfold. They thought I would disappear quietly, and I did. What they never considered was what would happen after I was gone. Not in a week, not in a month, but in the slow, creeping silence of systems that no longer responded, of dashboards that stopped loading, of workflows that broke in ways no one could trace. I did not sabotage a thing. I simply walked away and took my understanding with me. A week after walking out of Fluxen Technologies for the last time, I was barefoot in a lounge chair in Ubud, Bali, watching the rain drift across the rice fields. I had booked a one-way ticket the morning after the layoff, clicked purchase without hesitation. No backup plan, no fear, just freedom. The moment my plane touched down, I shut off my work email, muted Slack, and tossed my work badge into a drawer with no lock. My body was still catching up to the silence. No pings, no tickets, no requests. Just birds, incense, and the gentle clink of ice in a coconut shell. I had not planned on taking revenge. Not really. All I wanted was peace. But karma, as they say, has its own timing. I was sitting outside a little cafe near Monkey Forest when the first message from Jake came through. "Hey, do you know anything about the procurement flow being down?" I chuckled, nearly spilling my drink. Jake was one of the few people who truly understood the mess beneath Fluxen's polished surface. He had seen me glue systems together, fix things quietly before anyone knew they were broken. If anyone was going to notice the fallout first, it was him. I texted back with a polite shrug. "No idea, I have been off the grid." Which was not a lie. I had been off the grid, but I knew exactly what was happening. That procurement flow? It ran through a series of scripts authenticated with my credentials. Credentials I had revoked before leaving. They had ignored my requests to migrate the service into a shared account for years. They called it a low priority. Well, now it had jumped straight to high. A day later, another message. "Deployments are stuck. Jenkins is not triggering the pipeline." I sipped slowly, watching a gecko crawl across the bamboo ceiling. That webhook I disabled, quietly, with one click, was the key trigger for our deployment cycle. Without it, nothing moved. Builds stayed builds. Releases stayed ideas. And Jenkins sat there waiting for an instruction that would never come. I imagined Brian staring at his screen, wondering why the dashboards were empty, why the buttons did nothing. It was the kind of slow disaster only a few people understood, which made it all the more satisfying. Jake messaged again the next morning. "Support tickets are piling up. They cannot route internally." Of course they could not. The ticketing system was powered by custom automations I had written. It was beautiful when it worked. But now that the triggers were dead and the endpoints were locked out, those requests were falling into a black hole. I pictured the new consultants, those Delta Curve hotshots, clicking around like tourists without a map, wondering why nothing responded. And I smiled, not because I wanted them to suffer, but because they had earned this. Every meeting they dismissed me in, every time they told me, "We will get to that later." Later was now. Jake never asked directly what I had done. He was smarter than that, but his texts kept coming in little bursts. They are trying to rebuild Jenkins, but no one has access. Then, Monica just asked if anyone knows how the workflows were structured. I nearly spit out my ginger tea. Monica, the same CEO who said she wanted to elevate strategic thinkers over technical doers? Now she needed a doer. Too bad she had already let me go with a 15-minute Zoom call and a generic exit script. The irony was delicious. I sent Jake one last message. Tell them I hope they find the documentation I never had time to write. He just replied with a laughing emoji and a thumbs up. He knew, and deep down, so did they. The company had built its foundation on invisible labor, mine, and when they removed me, they removed the keystone. The collapse was not malicious. It was natural, predictable, just like I had warned them. Back in Bali, I set my phone down and leaned back into the shade. A warm breeze passed over the terrace, carrying the scent of frangipani and wet earth. I was not angry anymore, not bitter. I was just done. They had chosen their efficiency. They had picked their consultants. They had made their cut, and now they were watching it all unravel, one broken script at a time. Back in Seattle, while I was drinking papaya smoothies in Bali and forgetting what day it was, Fluxen Technologies was falling apart faster than anyone could have predicted. The first week after my exit had been full of warning signs, but by the second week, the boardroom was in full-blown panic. No one could push code, nothing deployed. The Jenkins pipeline just sat there, lifeless, waiting on a webhook that no longer existed. Onboarding ground to a halt because the laptop provisioning scripts, written and maintained entirely by me, had no working auth tokens anymore. They were so tied to my personal cloud credentials that even the IT lead could not log in without triggering errors. Jake said the vendor payments stalled too. Procurement had no automated approvals anymore. Vendors who were used to smooth 48-hour payments were now waiting a week, sometimes more, with no updates. The accounting team was buried in spreadsheets and angry emails. Everything that had been seamless and quiet was now loud and broken. I imagined the finance director pacing the hallway with her phone pressed to her ear, trying to explain why quarterly billing had gone haywire. All because nobody asked, what happens if Camille leaves? The support desk was overwhelmed. Hundreds of internal tickets stacked up in the backlog with no routing logic. The auto-prioritization system was toast. It could not escalate urgent issues because it relied on an internal workflow I had built using custom Python scripts and Google APIs. Now, it was just a shell with a flashing red banner across the top. System error, unauthorized access. The junior techs tried resetting things, but they had no admin access. Most of them had no idea how the system worked in the first place. They had always said, Camille will take care of it. Well, Camille was gone. Delta Curve Solutions, those so-called consultants who had promised to streamline inefficiencies, were now knee-deep in chaos with no clue how to fix any of it. They had no root access, no infrastructure maps, and no idea what tools were dependent on what. They ran audits, pinged servers, and cross-referenced outdated architecture docs. All they found were dead ends, broken links, and access-denied errors. One of them tried to reverse engineer the deployment pipeline, but gave up after 2 days, saying it was too customized to decipher quickly. Jake told me they spent hours debating whether to reboot the production cluster, until someone realized they did not even know where the production cluster was hosted. That was when Reed, the CTO, finally admitted he had no idea how anything really worked. He stood in front of the executive team, sweating through his blazer, trying to explain why nothing moved forward. We are experiencing minor delays due to a gap in system knowledge, he said, but Jake told me that in private. Reed turned to him in the hallway and whispered, Did Camille ever document any of this? Jake just blinked at him. You mean the stuff she asked to document and got shut down every time? Reed went pale. Monica, the CEO, tried to keep a brave face for the board, but Jake said she was clearly rattled. They had spent $60,000 on Delta Curve, hoping to modernize operations. Instead, they were burning through client trust, staff morale, and cash all at once. Clients started pulling projects. One of their major vendors threatened to cancel the contract if invoices were not processed by Friday. The board started asking questions, real questions. Why was this system so reliant on one person? Why did nobody prepare for succession? Monica dodged. Reed stammered. Brian, of course, was nowhere to be seen. It got to the point where they started calling former employees to see if anyone knew how my systems worked. They even tried to reach out to an intern I mentored 2 summers ago. Jake sent me a screenshot of an internal Slack message. Urgent. Does anyone have Camille's personal email? I laughed out loud. They wanted help. After ignoring my input for years, after cutting me out with a lazy 15-minute call, they wanted me to come back and bail them out. But I was not coming back. Not now. Not ever. I was finally out of their system, literally and figuratively. Let them learn what it feels like to ignore the backbone of their operations. Let them realize too late that systems do not run on buzzwords and dashboards. They run on people, quiet, consistent people like me. And when those people walk out the door, they take more than a badge and a laptop. They take the glue. By the 3rd week, Fluxen Technologies was no longer trying to play it cool. Everything that had once functioned without question was now a gaping hole in their operations. Clients were livid. They had contracts with delivery timelines, some of which were already overdue. Onboarding had turned into a logistical nightmare, with new hires waiting up to 10 days for equipment and system access. One of our biggest partners, Everlane Medical, threatened to walk away entirely. They had 8 employees stuck in limbo because the provisioning system I built had collapsed. Without those scripts, nothing moved. And without documentation or admin access, no one knew how to fix it. Jake messaged me late one night. His time, not mine. I was sitting on a beach in Ahmed, watching the tide roll in with a plate of grilled snapper and a glass of local wine. He said Delta Curve had already billed over $40,000 trying to recover what I built, and they still had not made it past the first layer of my logic trees. Their dev team could not follow the custom workflow configurations I had designed because they were built to solve our problems, not general, off-the-shelf solutions. They kept trying to force generic patches, and the systems kept rejecting them. At one point, they brought in a specialist from a security firm to audit the infrastructure. According to Jake, the guy opened the deployment map, blinked twice, and asked, "Who architected this?" When they said my name, he apparently replied, "Well, she was a genius, or a ghost." That was the thing. I never needed praise. I never needed fanfare. But now, in my absence, they were finally starting to understand what they lost. It was not just the systems. It was the foresight. The attention to edge cases, the fail-safes nobody knew were even there until they stopped working. With no way forward, the board finally approved an emergency fund, $250,000, fast-tracked to rebuild everything I had done. From the ground up, Jake said the room was dead silent when they realized how much they would need to invest just to catch up, not even to innovate. Reed looked like he had aged 10 years. His hair had started to gray at the temples, and Jake told me he had not been sleeping. "He is in the office by 6 and still there at 10, he said, "but nothing is getting better." I almost felt bad for him. Almost. The irony was, they could have just listened. I had asked more than once for support to document the infrastructure, train backups, create redundancy, but Brian always brushed it off. "It works, Camille. Why fix what is not broken?" Now it was broken, and not just broken, it was tangled. You cannot fix a machine you never understood, and you definitely cannot replace the person who designed it just because a consultant showed up with a slideshow full of buzzwords. Monica, the CEO, had started making daily check-ins with the board, trying to stem the panic. But Jake said the trust was already eroding. One board member asked flat out, "How did we let one person become this critical without any continuity plan?" Monica tried to blame the previous leadership team, which was ridiculous since she had been CEO for 2.5 years. Nobody was buying it anymore, especially not the investors who were watching their timelines slip and their cash burn rate spike. Meanwhile, the Delta Curve team was floundering. One of their lead consultants, a guy named Victor, supposedly admitted in a private meeting that they were not trained to handle deeply custom infrastructure. "We thought this was standard enterprise architecture," he said. "It is not." They even tried reaching out to people who had left the company years ago, hoping someone might remember something, anything, that would help them reverse engineer my systems. But that was the thing. You cannot reverse engineer intuition. You cannot recreate years of experience with a purchase order, and you sure cannot throw money at a problem that requires understanding. I had walked away with peace in my chest, knowing exactly what would unfold. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I knew how fragile it all was. The systems worked because I cared. They ran because I never let anything slip through the cracks. And now, they were learning the expensive and painful way that loyalty cannot be replaced. It has to be earned. And respect? That should never be an afterthought. I had been quiet for weeks. While Fluxen Technologies spiraled, I was thousands of miles away, eating fresh mango in the shade and watching the waves roll in with a calm I had not felt in years. My inbox was full of updates from Jake, still fighting the good fight back in Seattle. But I kept my distance. I had no interest in gloating. No need to say, "I told you so." I figured the silence spoke for itself, but one evening, with a soft breeze rolling through my villa and the lights of Ubud flickering below, I opened LinkedIn and I wrote a post. It was not long, just a few lines, no names, no accusations, just the truth wrapped in a quiet kind of defiance. I typed, "Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the only thing holding your infrastructure together, and sometimes, when they leave, everything falls apart." I added a simple caption, "Grateful for new beginnings. Bali's been kind to me." I closed my laptop and went to sleep with no expectations. I just needed to get the words out. I needed someone, anyone, to understand what it felt like to be invisible until everything broke. When I woke up, the post had exploded. Overnight, it had crossed 50,000 views, hundreds of reactions, dozens of comments, and my inbox? It was overflowing. Engineering directors, CTOs, startups, VCs, they all had the same message. "We'd love to talk. Your story hit home. Been there, done that, still recovering." Apparently, I had struck a nerve, one I did not even know was so raw across the industry. It was not just me. So many of us were carrying systems on our backs, never noticed until we left. One message stopped me in my tracks. It was from a woman named Dana Kim, CTO of a fintech company in Chicago. She said, "We've been looking for someone with your mindset. Quiet, sharp, strategic. Would you be open to a call?" I did not even hesitate. We spoke the next day, and it felt like breathing fresh air after years in a basement. She understood infrastructure. She respected resilience. And most of all, she valued builders, the kind who made things work without needing applause. But the real kicker, that came 3 days later. I was scrolling through the comments on my post when I saw a familiar name, Liam Rios, a board member at Fluxen. He had liked the post, just a tiny thumbs up. No comment, no message, just that silent acknowledgement that he had read it, and he knew. I sat there for a full minute, rereading the notification, and then I smiled, because in that one small gesture, everything clicked. I had been erased, ignored, written off as redundant, and now even the people who let me go were starting to see the truth. I called Jake to tell him. "Guess who liked my post?" I asked. "Don't tell me I'd someone from the board?" "Liam." He laughed. "Oh man, that's going to be awkward at their next meeting." I laughed too, but it was not bitter anymore. It felt good, light even. Because I had not burned a single bridge. I had not leaked anything, attacked anyone, or started drama. I had simply told my truth, and the world listened. That was the part they never understood back at Fluxen. I never needed revenge. I just needed a voice. And for once, the industry gave it back to me in full. Job offers kept pouring in. Some came with signing bonuses, others with full remote options and generous equity. And yet, I was not chasing titles. I was looking for alignment. Somewhere I could build without being buried. Somewhere I could speak without being silenced. Somewhere I could leave documentation without begging for approval. And slowly I realized I was not just choosing a new job. I was choosing who I wanted to be now that I was finally seen. 2 months after my LinkedIn post went viral, I officially accepted an offer to become Chief Technology Officer at a fast-growing AI company based in Austin. It was not just any offer. It came with full creative freedom, a healthy equity stake, and something I had never truly had before, unfiltered respect. The CEO, Tara Delgado, made it clear during our first call. She said, "We do not just want a CTO with credentials. We want someone who knows how to build from the ground up, someone like you." That line stuck with me, because for years I had been building silently, and now someone finally saw me. The transition felt surreal. I moved into a bright, open loft in East Austin with tall windows and warm light all day long. Every morning I walked along Lady Bird Lake with my coffee in hand, taking in the sun and the sound of the water. No Slack pings, no last-minute panic meetings, no feeling like I was one comment away from being dismissed. I was not Camille in the corner anymore. I was Camille Jameson, CTO, 36 years old, born in Cincinnati, now leading a team of builders who actually wanted to learn how systems worked, who asked questions, who cared about documentation, who respected the quiet work as much as the loud. We had weekly stand-ups where my ideas were not just heard, they were implemented. Engineers on my team sent me thank you messages after sprint reviews. Tara made space for my voice in board meetings. For the first time, I did not have to fight to prove my worth. It was recognized from the moment I stepped through the door, and every night, as I looked out from my balcony at the skyline, I felt something I had not in a long time: peace. Meanwhile, Fluxen was still unraveling. Jake kept me updated, just enough to satisfy my curiosity. They had burned through their emergency budget trying to rebuild the systems I had built for a fraction of the cost. Delta Curve was still trying to reverse engineer what I had left behind, and they had brought in yet another external firm to audit what remained. Nothing was truly broken, but everything was brittle. When Jake forwarded me a job listing Fluxen posted, Senior Systems Engineer with experience in full-stack automation, ticketing systems, and DevOps pipelines, I laughed. It was my old job, word for word, except now they wanted 3 people to fill it. Jake said Reed, the CTO, had been noticeably quieter in meetings. Monica, the CEO, had started dodging questions from the board, and every now and then, he would catch Brian, the same man who called me redundant, staring blankly at a wall of tickets with no idea what to do. I did not feel glee. Not really. Just a cool, calm kind of closure. The kind you only get when justice takes its time, but still lands. One afternoon, as I wrapped up a design session with my new team, I glanced out the window at the Austin skyline and realized I had everything I used to hope for. But it did not come from playing politics or waiting for someone else to lift me up. It came from walking away, from trusting that the work I had done mattered, even if they never said it, from letting my silence speak for itself. Fluxen could keep trying to backfill the knowledge they lost, but knowledge is not a file. It is experience. It is intuition. It is the weight of knowing what could break before it even does. And they had let all of that walk out the door. I got an email that same week from a woman in her 20s. She had read my LinkedIn post and was facing a similar situation. Overlooked, underpaid, doing the work of 3 people. She asked me, "How did you know it was time to leave?" I wrote her back the next morning. When staying felt more like shrinking than growing, I said, I knew I had already outgrown the space. That was what Fluxen never understood. You cannot replace people by title alone. You cannot rebuild systems without honoring the ones who built them. And you definitely cannot fire the backbone of your infrastructure and expect nothing to collapse. I did not have to burn the building down. I just left, and they watched the lights flicker out one by one. Jake flew out to visit me in Austin on a Friday afternoon. He had been promising for weeks, and now that things had finally calmed down at Fluxen, well, as calm as they could be after bleeding $250,000 trying to replicate my work, he had time to make good on it. I picked him up from the airport, and as we drove through the streets lined with food trucks and live music, I could see the stress peeling off his shoulders. He looked around at the murals and skyline and said, "You really upgraded your life, Camille?" I just smiled and kept driving. That night, we headed to one of my favorite rooftop bars downtown. It was the kind of place with string lights, a DJ spinning laid-back house music, and a breeze that made the city feel softer. We found a spot by the railing high above the hum of traffic and voices. Jake ordered a beer. I looked at the bartender and grinned. "Can you make me a spicy mezcal cocktail? Something off menu, let's call it the redundancy." The bartender laughed, but he made it. Smoke, heat, citrus. It was perfect. We toasted under the stars, and I said, "To letting people learn the hard way." Jake shook his head and replied, "To teaching them what happens when they forget who built the engine." We laughed, but there was truth behind it. Fluxen had learned their lesson. It just cost them more than they ever expected. The emergency fund they used to rebuild my systems was only part of the story. They lost clients, momentum, and most importantly, trust. And all because they thought I was expendable? I never wanted revenge. Not the dramatic kind, at least. I did not need to hack anything or blow the whistle or leak documents. All I had to do was walk away, quietly, with intention, and with the full knowledge that I was never truly redundant. They handed me that word like an insult, but I made it my badge, my cocktail, my story. And now, here I was, telling it from the top of a rooftop bar in a city where I was finally valued. Jake told me they had hired 2 engineers and a DevOps contractor just to try to keep the systems alive. And still, there were things breaking every week because they were chasing ghosts I had long since let go of. He said Reed was holding on to meetings like a life raft, pretending to steer while the ship turned in circles. I asked if Monica had reached out. He shook his head. "She will not," he said. "Pride is expensive." I nodded. I had already paid that cost once. I was done footing the bill. As the night stretched on, we talked about old times, sprint deadlines, late-night patching, all the invisible saves I had made over the years. Jake said something that stuck with me. "You were the power line in the wall, Camille. Everyone used the energy, but no one thought about the source." That was it. That was the truth behind it all. You can automate systems, you can outsource roles, but you cannot fake the mind behind the machine, not for long. The next morning, we grabbed coffee from a quiet cafe down the block. Jake had a flight to catch, and I had a full day of roadmap planning with my new team. As we parted ways, he said, "You know, I never doubted you'd land on your feet, but I did not expect you to end up on top of the world." I smiled, handed him a to-go cup, and said, "Funny thing about falling, you learn how to build your wings real quick." He laughed, and I watched him disappear into the terminal crowd. Later that day, as I sat in my sunlit loft reviewing our new infrastructure outline, I thought about that mezcal cocktail. The redundancy. It was more than a joke. It was a symbol of what they lost, of what I reclaimed, of what happens when quiet workers decide to stop being quiet. I never wanted to destroy Fluxon. I wanted to be respected by them. But when they showed me I never would be, I gave them exactly what they asked for, a world without me. And now, every time I sip that drink, I smile to myself and think, cheers to the backbone you called unnecessary. I hope the silence taught you what my presence never could.